welcome to this episode, the Instructional Design One, of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. First up, we want to say how much we appreciate everyone who rates, reviews and donates towards the podcast. Your contributions are appreciated more than you would know and simply wonderful. Instructional design was a really popular topic and has been requested by people from around the world, so we decided to get a truly global pair of speakers. Our guests this week are Nandita Kulkarni and Tabatha Dragonberry. Nandita started her career designing learning and facilitating in the academic context. Having moved to the corporate sphere more than 14 years ago, she's worked across different geographies and led teams delivering learning, especially in the technology-led space. Currently in Dubai, she brings a strong consultative mindset with a holistic design perspective to every project. Tabatha Dragonberry is a learning and development professional with a varied background both in academia and corporate. She's passionate about helping others who are getting into instructional design as a coach and as a mentor. She's also a registered respiratory therapist and continues to serve the healthcare community as a host of the Vent Room podcast. Nandita was recording in the evening while it was morning for Tabitha. This is the 9-hour time difference episode, and it's definitely worth a listen. This is Women Talking About Learning. This is Nandita and Tabitha talking about instructional design.
Hey, Nandita. Thank you for joining me today for this instructional design podcast, which I don't know about you, but I feel like sometimes it's intimidating when you just have like this open topic that's so broad.
I hear you. Thanks for having me here, Tabitha. It's good to have an opportunity to discuss this, right? Because there's a lot of stuff around instructional design that gets thrown around now. So where do you want to start?
So I'm going to ask you, what does instructional design, like that whole terminology, mean to you?
You're going for the tough questions right away, aren't you?
Well, I think that's really where we're at, it encompasses so much, but what is it for you?
Yeah. So listen, there's so many different job titles today that seem to sort of cover this skill area. So you have performance specialist, you have instructional design, you have learning technologist, you have digital designers, you have UX, UI. I mean, there's so many different things that actually go into that skill bucket, isn't it? For me, when you ask me personally about instructional design, it is about creating experiences that help people learn some key skills or behaviors along the way, right? And that today covers so many things.
Right.
What about you?
I totally agree that it's an experience, right? And there's even the title learning experience designer,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So I know that I help with a lot of people transitioning into instructional design. And that's always the thing, is like these job titles, there's so many. And it throws you off, but I feel like they all do the same thing.
It does. And they don't really reflect the entire spectrum of skills that goes into it. Like I've seen, for example, your portfolio, right? Part of being an instructional design is also knowing how to market that piece of learning that you develop. And so it involves that little skill around marketing as well. So yeah, instructional design, gosh, it's everything. It's that experience from start to finish, how it gets to the learner. To me, it's really that whole thing.
I feel like we're unicorns in a field of needing to do all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I know for me, I've faced different challenges and IDs. Sometimes it's difficult SMEs or just people not buying in, maybe not selling the right idea, or getting them to understand the return on investment, right? Because that's what we are. We have to show that, hey, this particular item, if we did that and we spent the money to do this, that we are going to recoup the money as well as more. What in your role is some challenges that you face?
So, instructional design, I like to tell people it's the art of making science look artful. So it is so backed by science and logic, but it's really, good instructional design when you don't feel it at all. correct? An experience feels intuitive and smooth and free flowing, and you really don't realize how it's been scaffolded and built for you to have that intuitive, massively natural experience. So one of my big challenges in instructional design is really, convincing people that instructional design is something that they need, because people think, logically structuring something is instructional design. So subject matter experts who believe that, I know how this subject matter needs to be chunked and needs to flow, versus why exactly are we doing it in this flow, and what is the outcomes you're looking at, and what's the kind of experience you're going to give the learner, right? So it's making that part visible, that science and that art visible, when in the actual product, it's sort of invisible to the learner. So yeah, to me, that's one of the large challenges in instructional design, letting people know why it's critical, when they don't really feel it or see it in many ways.
Right. And the way they're going to see it isn't going to be in the outcomes later, right? They're not going to see it when the person's taking it. You're going to you deliver this course, and then over time, you're looking for that behavioral change that you identified who knows how long ago, because you need to establish what you're looking for, but then taking the time to measure that after the fact, and being able to say, hey, we met our metric. We got to where we wanted to be.
Yeah.
I know that, as instructional designers, sometimes they don't see the value, they don't understand. What are something that you've done in your role that you've been able to overcome some of those challenges?
So, it's a very funny thing, because in my current job role, for example, I work in a hugely engineering driven field. I work in transport and logistics right now, and there's a lot around engineering. So I've begun to practice some of the lean methodology I hear my subject matters experts talk about, right? So it's the 5 whys. I'll always keep asking why. They say, we need to build this. Okay, why do you need to build it exactly? And then they go, for this, and you go, okay, why exactly? And it's an approach that seems to really work for the area and the industry I work in, and often for pure engineering, health kind of industries. This, Tabitha, this sort of really probative approach sort of seems to work really well, especially when you have subject matter experts that are very logic driven, and very quantitatively driven like that. So one of my key skills around there is really, ask why at least 5 times. Sometimes even they don't know exactly why they're doing something, and it helps them to get their thought process clear.
No, I totally agree. I come from a highly healthcare background, highly regulated. I actually have my green belt in Six Sigma overall, and going through and drilling down to the why, because again, not training doesn't solve everything. Somebody could come to your instructional design department and say, hey, I need a training for this. And it's not like an order on the menu. We need to be like, hey, why do you need this? And drilling that 5 whys approach is amazing, because it kind of drills down to, is this something that training is an option? Or is it something that it's in the process and procedures that they're missing something? So I think that's totally a tool to use, and you can do that in life. And sometimes you feel like a toddler, why, but you drill down to the most important thing.
And sometimes it's just a marketing thing. They don't even want learning. They just want to popularize an idea or a concept. And you're like, you should be going to comms for this. It's not necessarily a learning outcome you're looking at. So it helps.
So I know that we were talking before, and we were chit-chatting about what's the difference between like an internal client, so a client within an organization that you work for, versus a freelancer, and we're dealing with an external client. I know for me, when I'm thinking of those internal clients that I'm working with within an organization, we're thinking about our strategic planning. It's not just what do we need now in training, but also what do we need within the next 5 years, and as that company is growing or that company is making a pivot. Because right now, if you look in LinkedIn, Glassdoor, there's instructional design jobs like booming everywhere. And it's interesting to see this pivot, but are people pivoting because they realize the need, or are they pivoting because, oh, now this is the popular job to have in training and development?
Listen, I think it's a bit of both. I think over time, when you do design well and when you do instructional design well, people see the value. And of course, as people are exposed to more and more experiences, and over the last year, you know this and I know this, people have been exposed to massive amounts of learning, especially through technology and especially online, which means that everybody knows what works for them, right? So when they come across good experiences, people are really beginning to understand that value around instructional design. But I think it's also a little bit of what's the cool thing to do right now. So I hear you when you say that. But again, going back to what you were saying about internal versus external, for an external freelancer and somebody who comes in for a project or an initiative, it's often a little bit more transactional, right? We sort of build up the markers, you mark out the route, and the marathon needs to be run by the clients themselves. Whereas when you're inside the company, you're part of that race. That marathon is your marathon. You're part of the team that's running this marathon. So it's a very different perspective for instructional design. And I always find that, as when I'm inside something and I'm supporting internally, the drive is also to get into innovative spaces and to do fun work and to move the company culture along with that learning as well. So a little bit more of that investment, because you have, quite a bit of your skin in the game. Whereas as an external consultant, you can afford to be a little bit more transactional. You can sort of set up all of the milestones and the roadblocks and, all of that, but then you can walk away from it. So that's a little bit of an easier job sometimes, I think.
No, and I agree, because they are your client. You can guide them to the right thing.
Yeah.
And they could say the right thing's out of my budget, and I'm going to deal with what I can do, and I'm going to do the best within my budget, which I can totally understand. But you've guided them and given them some information to say, hey, you could do this, and this is a little bit better. I mean, nowadays, every person out there on TikTok and YouTube are making a course, right? And it's interesting to see like this explosion, and they're just dumping their knowledge, which is, yes, great. Thank you for putting it out there. But somebody doing it and being that SME and saying, oh, I think this is how it could be chunked, versus an instructional designer saying, okay, hey, how do we really look at that? Because people join any course because they're looking for an outcome. It's not something that, oh, I'm going to take this online course and I don't want to walk out with a new skill at the end. And I think just depending on how it's presented, there might be some independent course creators that do a really good job, but I think that there's probably that opposite. And really, I know that I go to YouTube. Like I had a car, I inherited it from my dad. And I just remembered, I'm like, oh, okay, the battery in the trunk is in the trunk. Yeah. And I automatically just go to YouTube, and it's like, okay, something was happening. I had to take the battery out. So why do you think people are buying into YouTube learning? And now like TikTok is even having its own like EduTalk, which it's working. And I'm on it. I've actually started to go on TikTok, and I have two different channels. One is my healthcare side, and one is my ID side, where I am making little clips where we're talking about topics of instructional design, just like introduction, pieces. So what do you think is the buy-in for this type of learning?
So, I think it's a lot of different things. One part of it is really context, right? There's so much content out there that content fatigue is a real thing. Okay. And faced with the option between a 1-hour course and a 1.5 minute TikTok video, I'm an instructional designer. I've worked in this field for 15 years, and I will choose the 1.5 minute because I don't have an hour. So that's one part of it, right? It's that context around it. The second thing is, as we've grown up in the digital space, one of the things is just-in-time learning, isn't it? It's about getting what I need when I want it. So how many of us have gone to YouTube to say how to pivot a table? And, it points you out. Now, even YouTube's gotten so smart, it points you out exactly to that part of the video that shows you how to do that. And you go in and you get out. So I think that's part of it, the context around how we now just go and learn the bits and pieces that we need to learn. Previously, this wasn't as accessible. And I think that is a really big difference. So I'm a bit of a hobby quilter, sewer kind of thing. And I find TikTok is amazing. So you have all of these little patterns that they will show you in a minute and a half. And it's great because I don't want to sit there for an hour learning how to run something, run up a pattern. And 1.5 minutes is just enough for me to get started off and go off. So like I said, two things, context and just-in-time learning that's relevant and that's there when you need it. And I think that's why YouTube and TikTok are wonderful. But again, for the larger skill pieces, when you want to grow your skill, particularly deepen your expertise, that's when, again, YouTube and TikTok are not enough, right? And that's when you go back to the more bigger, larger pieces of learning.
Right. And you can also include those types of style items in those larger pieces. I come from a film and video background. So when I naturally go to video, but that video can be engaging in that primer for that more technical piece that we draw them into. So I know, like for me, when I recently did a learning experience and I was blown away, and for an instructional designer to walk away and be like, mouth watering learning experience, it was amazing. And the thing is, it was the production quality. I would say it was the equivalent to a big budget movie. Mm-hmm. And they've invested a lot of time and money. And I've seen a couple other instructional design companies that do that approach. Mm-hmm. And, I'm on Netflix every day. I'm on those different things. So I think it's something to consider that, yes, they have invested a lot of money in this particular course, but they're a course seller. So now they can pitch this high quality, high engaging course to organizations like the one that I had to take this course for. Mm-hmm. So I know that we know when an experience goes extremely great because you feel it and you're able to see the outcomes later. And we know when an experience goes really, really horribly. But what are some of the things that has affected in your design process that, you're like, oh, this isn't going to make the mark, or it didn't make the mark? Because I know budget's a huge one, right? Because I said this was a mouth-watering learning experience, but I'm looking at it from a film and video and instructional design view. And I'm thinking this was a lot of money and investment and time.
Yeah. And this is also where things like YouTube and TikTok really hobble you sometimes, because you have clients walk in the door and they go, but that person's doing it on TikTok. And you go, yes, but have you looked at the production value, right? And have you looked at the outcomes it's driving? So this has become a larger piece, which I'm constantly working on negotiating and influencing, right? Which is what kind of budget gives you what kind of output, how long you need to produce something versus what your time expectations are. So listen, it's massive in terms of that managing, what a client's expectations are when you say, this is what something we can do with what you want, and then you quote them a figure and they go, oh, that's like 3 times the budget we have, and you go, yes, but that's the output you want. So listen, budget, time, managing time with people when they turn up with you and say, we need a course in 15 days, and you go, yes, but you also want it to look like something Steven Spielberg produced, and I don't know how to do that in 15 days.
Well, what the funny part is, today I was watching on Netflix Pet Stars, right? Because I love my pets. But they were talking about this producer, and I can't, Michael's Animals. He has a YouTube channel. He has a gray cat. You probably, if you watched it, you know who I'm talking about. And he does YouTube videos with green screen, with multiple videos. I mean, it's CGI.
Yeah.
And some of these TikTok videos, they are not, I've recorded myself on my phone. There's some cool little things you can do with transitions and pausing the video that don't cost money. No. But like some of the stuff, like TikTok channels, they're investing time and money. And that's where, if you're wanting something that's like amazing, you're going to have to pay for it. And 15-day turnaround. Yeah. You're not going to get Steven Spielberg in 15 days.
No, and you're going to have to pay for it in one way or the other, right? It's going to be either budget or time or some variation combination of that, because exactly, I've had a client come up to me and say, yeah, but in YouTube, they put a screen at the back and you know, you can show the Eiffel Tower at the back. And I said, yes, that's called a green screen. We don't have that capability. Oh, but you know why? So yeah, it's the resources at the end of the day, whether it's money, whether it's time, things can get, sometimes it's people and effort, right? Having multiple, like having a videographer on the team makes a huge difference if you have a small team doing all of your instructional design. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. So I think as instructional designers, one of the largest challenges is managing expectations, especially when we have these easy, consumable, short things that are actually very big budget. I just ordered something. I'm a little bit of a Kickstarter addict. I don't know if you're familiar with Kickstarter, but man, they've taken my money. And today my little thing got funded, and it is an inflatable green screen studio for my garage, because I am addicted to video and being able to do certain things. And I'm just like, ooh, let me get it now when it's cheap.
Yes.
Because it's going to be more expensive later.
You need to send me the link.
They funded it today. So maybe if it goes on Indiegogo, I'll let you know.
Okay.
But yeah, negotiating and influencing. And I think you have to gain that credibility and that power with your organization or things like that. Yeah. But it's definitely, it's not easy, right? But I think that sometimes you need to get those quick wins. You're like, hey, this is what I can do at this cost. This is what I can do with this time. And the powers that be, the stakeholders in the organization that need to make these decisions need to realize that, hey, in those project management meetings, and they're starting to, they should have their instructional designer in those meetings, because they can get you to the reality of it, right? So if you're making those project charters, who needs to be all involved? What are all the pieces? Because it sounds simple, right? Hey, I want a learning that looks like this, but then they don't realize all the cogs that are needed to get to that particular piece.
Yeah. And there is an extremely high number of times where I've had a subject matter expert and a top level stakeholder walk in and say, this is what we want. And I go, yes, but have you informed? And especially when you're an internal consultant, right? And you go, yes, but your subject matter, also goes to health and safety. And this also covers risk management. And have you gotten in touch with those departments? And are they okay with the learning material you're producing? So it's so much of that highlighting all of the gaps, not only in the way that the subject matter flows, but also in the way that you build that learning product and experience, right? So, and I find that credibility, the more credibility you have with your stakeholders. And I'm sure you see this, Tabitha, for people whom we move the needle actually, and when they come back, then suddenly you find you have that much more power at that negotiation. And when you say, I need 10 days, they don't push back and say, we have only 5. It's sort of like this incremental scaffolding build of credibility that you sort of need to build with people and move it in small increments to get that power to be able to influence that involvement and of different stakeholders and the change around the product.
And I think that influence is also coming from how you build evaluation into the design, right? Because when we are looking at outcomes and to move that needle, we need to have data. So building that evaluation and realizing that, hey, this is the need, this is what we're needing to increase or decrease by whatever percentage to get their results that they want, right? Because that's everybody, there is a business need, they're really, nowadays of training for training is out the window. It's like, hey, this is our business need. This is our situation. We need to translate this data and make it actionable.
Yeah. What
do you do in your process to kind of do that in your designing?
So again, and I'm sitting here thinking of, how do I start and how do I end? And remember, we spoke about the 5 whys right in the beginning. And if I get to that 5th why, I will normally get to a point where I know, okay, so this is that particular KPI. This is that particular output or outcome that they want to really see impacted. Whether it is the number of people turning in safety inspection reports on time, or whether it is, compliance and therefore zero audit, what do you call them, findings. So the deeper you question and the closer you get to recognizing what that metric is right up front, it's going to be really, really helpful. And if you do it right, it's something that even the subject matter expert can sort of go back to their everyday job and they will see the needle moving. They don't even need to come back to you to say it's working, it's not working, because it's out there and they see it and they know that that's happening, at least in part because of the learning and because of all the other support we've built around that learning.
And I know that you said that you've worked in a kind of regulated industry. I worked in healthcare. A lot of the stuff that we're doing is regulated. But do you think in regulated industries, we can still design things that are fun?
Yes. Do you not remember the gamification boom about a year and a half ago?
Oh, I'm taking my gamification grandmaster or game master course next month. So I totally get that. But for those people who aren't in our industry per se, because we have the listeners can be a little bit of everything. But I think that just because you work in finance or you work in software, there is a way to navigate and create story, right? Story into it. One of my mentors is Anna Sembramowitz. She is an interactive storyteller. And I feel like that's the other thing that people need to integrate more, because I feel like I've seen some courses or samples and portfolios. At the beginning, it's always, in this course, we are going to learn X, Y, and Z. And you're putting your learning objective out there, but does the learner actually need to know the learning objective, or do they just need to know like the focus objective, right? Like for them, what are they needing to focus on, where it can be that story that says, hey, you're a salesperson and are you interested in increasing your productivity and what do you call it? My brain is a little fried today, but you want to seal the deal more often. Yeah. Let's look at the tools or the skills
that can help you do that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that people need to realize that, yes, learning objectives are there. That's for us that
Yeah.
isn't necessarily what the learner needs to see.
Yeah.
And that we can give them that focused objective that kind of generalizes
Yeah.
everything. I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for hours. Instructional design is such a broad bucket, and it is definitely something that I'm sure the Women in Learning podcast is going to just allow other people to talk on it, because this is our interpretation of just being said, hey, let's talk about instructional design.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways to look at it.
Yeah, but when you were talking about story and interactive story, it reminded me of something really simple and that I like to tell my stakeholders, which is, how many people do you know who follow Keeping Up with the Kardashians? As humans, we have a natural bent to wanting to know really salacious details and detailed story arcs about things. We like it when there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's why the Kardashians have 12 effing seasons of this, right? So, I mean, the saga goes on, and that entertains you. It hooks you. It also helps you to go along with the grain of the learning. So, so I think in that sense, I totally, completely agree with your piece around the story and having to have that, pull people in and take them along a plot line so that they actually feel that learning happen. But I wanted to also talk about in this one, because it's women talk about learning, and I wanted to ask you this time, do you think it affects your approach to instructional design also? Because I've realized there's a lot of us in this field. Do you think being women impacts that in any major way, our approach to instructional design or how we do this job?
I think for me, as someone who I know that multitasking doesn't exist, but we do it anyway. I think that, yes, as a woman looking at things, I feel like we read into things more. If you're it's like, if a man is silent, we want to know why. Why? What's going on? And I feel like we poke and prod and always are looking for a reason. Versus, that, like my husband, if he's just silent, he's just silent. There isn't necessarily a reason why. But like, I always interpret it, there's a reason. What's going on? So I think that we're always looking for something, like there has to be an answer, versus our male counterparts. I don't know. But if you look at some TED Talks, there's one, and I'll find it and I'll send Andrew the link. And it just talks about, like, sometimes men, it just is.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you there. But the other thing that, while you were speaking, I was also thinking of is that, and I speak for myself. The feminine is alive in many ways in many different people, right? But there is a thing about nuance, and there is a thing about grays that, instructional design often seems to wander into, where you're like, it's not exactly entirely this way, but it isn't exactly entirely the other as well. And I find that I'm a little bit better at being able to handle that. Whereas I've seen male counterparts who tend to be very, very structured and very, very rigid, and this is the theory behind this, and we should follow this for this reason, and just sort of being quite rule bound, for lack of another word, in that. And I find sometimes that I bring that to the table because I've had a I love it. One of my favorite speakers is Esther Perel, and she always says, if you've had a 2-year-old throw a tantrum, then you know that power is not about who's the biggest, right? And so in the same way, instructional design, sometimes the rules just go out of the window in some scenarios, whether it's because a particular client culture doesn't support it, whether it's a particular nuance around what they're trying to build. And I find I'm better able to navigate that, and I'm okay with that ambiguity and ambivalence around it.
Yeah, and I think that relates to like women are always like, why? And then it's like sometimes for men, it just is, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, like this is the way we did it, so this just is,
Yeah.
versus those types of things.
Yeah.
So no, I think that I think I mean, we could keep on going, but I know that we want to let people get back to their lives. And if you have any questions, I know that you can connect with me and Nandita on LinkedIn, and we're willing to chit chat.
Yeah. And I know that Tabitha has some lovely portfolio out there, and I've seen a bit of it, and I definitely think you should share that widely. I think there's some phenomenal stuff you're doing. Unfortunately, since I work for corporations, I can't usually share my work. So, but it's nice. And for those of you who are considering instructional design, all I can say, and Tabatha, jump in with your opinion on this, is it can be an immensely rewarding career, especially if you are able to contribute in that meaningful fashion. One of my prized values is really helping and making the world a little bit better, and improving design. And making a good design available makes the world a little bit better at the time, right? So
I
for those of
totally
you,
agree.
yeah. So
All right. Well, Nandita, I'm going to check it out. It was good to chat with you today, and I hope we'll have to connect again just for fun.
Yes. Not just for fun, but also because I think you have a really cool surname and I want that. So thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with me, man. I really appreciate it.
I agree. Thanks.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
I was recently on an instructional design podcast and said that I felt a bit of a fraud because I didn't think of myself as an instructional designer. Listening to Nandita and Tabitha, I realised that it's such a broad sector. We could probably do this episode 5 times over and come up with 5 different interpretations of it. A massive thank you to Nandita and Tabitha for such a wonderful episode and for keeping me so busy during the recording. There are dozens of links in this episode, and all of the details are in the show notes. If you want to get in touch, please email, use the contact form, or tweet. All of the connections are in the show notes and on our website, womentalkingaboutlearning.com. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.